Woke doctors panic as DEI for doctors gets canceled. Coming from the Washington Post, racism was called a health threat. Then came the DEI backlash. Well, why would there be any backlash? They went ahead and redefined what the word racist meant and what racism means. They claim, the Washington Post, the liberals, that racism can only be done by people who are not black people, which is ridiculous. Of course, anyone can have feelings of people where they treat them the same as if they're part of a group without judging them as an individual. Well, they don't want that. That's the opposite of diversity, equity, and inclusion. A growing number of institutes exploring the nexus between racism, their new definition of racism, and health, and their researchers are under attack. The attack is defense, because clearly this is an attack to try to say that we call you a racist because we feel like there's systemic racism. We call you a racist because we want to. And yeah, we've redefined the word racist so it means what we want it to mean, which means you're supposed to be responsible because of your skin color if other people are having health issues. If this was allowed to continue, and it looks like it's going to be stopped, the divisiveness that DEI has put into the culture would be nothing compared to this. This is saying if you have health problems, it's the fault of this other race. David Williams and Rachel Hardiman are population health researchers. They work at different universities with one thing in common. Both have been added to a right-wing watch list for teaching about researching the ways racism affects health. At the American Academy of Dermatology, some members propose sunsetting all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, arguing DEI has evolved into a political movement filled with perceived anti-Semitism that labels people as oppressed or oppressor. And grant-making organizations that awarded millions of dollars to investigate racism as a threat to public health are now asking some researchers to stop using the word racism. Talk about toxic. This is about the most toxic thing you could have people do. These researchers are also like political science researchers. They're not legitimate doctors even. This is one of their researchers, Rachel Hardiman. She's a PhD with an MPH. You know, that's great. She's not a medical doctor. She's also a tenured professor. I'm sorry, I'm never going to buy into the fact that those people with that skin color are causing health damage to those people with that skin color just by existing. A growing number of U.S. institutes created to explore the nexus between racism and health, and the researchers who preside over them, are finding themselves under attack, their missions and funding in peril, barely 4 years after the nation had what many called its racial reckoning. Other efforts to address systemic racism and inequality in education and corporate America have encountered resistance, but the stakes are especially stark with healthcare because centuries of inequities yield life or death consequences. These people would say that there are life or death consequences just based on someone's skin color, and you're responsible for their life or death consequences. This is so far out there and so dangerous. And if you're not involved in the medical community, how would you even know that millions of dollars are being spent trying to create what I consider to be, in my opinion, completely nonsensical, bogus research to justify unbelievable, damaging, dangerous, divisive actions? And even if you had a good week this week, this is the best news of the week to see the pushback on this, causing these people to not be able to go forward with this with the momentum that they had. It's being taken apart. Quote, "It's very taxing. This anti-DEI movement creates a climate of fear," said Chandra Ford, a professor at Emory University and founding director of the Center for the Study of Racism, Social Justice, and Health. Sorry to have inconvenienced Chandra Ford as she's putting together research and getting involved with a program that is the most dangerous thing we could do socially in the United States. Sorry it's inconvenient, but you're going to have to live with it, Ms. Ford. In her case, Ford said she was told by a funder who gave her money to study racism, quote, not to use that terminology after the project was underway, after the funders signed on to it, after the proposal was approved, and after the project was already ongoing. Which is to say, don't use racism in whatever nonsensical research report you put together. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in anybody that would say they would seriously study something like this and put documentation to this goal-seeking nonsense to try to create a more divisive country than we already have. Of course, the funders are starting to realize, hey, we're actually like setting fire to something that maybe could not be controlled. It's absolutely dangerous. Of course, don't do that. While declining to identify the organization, Ford said this was its rationale. The political winds are shifting, and this work is now high risk. In spring 2020, George Floyd died. Lives in Black, Hispanic, and Native American communities were being cut short at grossly disproportionate rates by the coronavirus. This I'm not familiar with. We could do a whole other video about that. We don't need to question it. Let's just move on. And anti-Asian hate was on the rise. Well, I don't know who was attacking the Asians, but it wasn't the people they're trying to imply were attacking the Asians here. Corporations declare Black Lives Matter and promised billions of dollars to address health, education, and economic inequality. Hospitals created chief diversity officers. Anti-racism research centers and programs received an influx of money. Federal health agencies in hundreds of cities and states declared racism a threat to public health and vowed to end it. The backlash was swift, as a mostly conservative counter-movement began to argue that DEI doesn't mean fairness, justice, and representation, but discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination. Which is correct. It is not about fairness. It's about demonization and division. This reflects a broader movement. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education's DEI legislation tracker, state lawmakers have introduced at least 85 anti-DEI bills since 2023. More than a dozen Republican attorney generals sent a letter urging Fortune 100 companies to re-examine their illegal DEI strategies after the Supreme Court banned race-conscious college admissions policies. And the conservative activist who led the campaign to oust Claudine Gay, Harvard University's first Black president, who resigned amid plagiarism allegations in January, said on Twitter that it was the beginning of the end for DEI in America's institutions. And that gentleman's name is Christopher Rufo. Among the arguments against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that they deepen racial inequality by lowering standards to make space for unqualified people of color, resulting in reverse discrimination because skin color, not merit, becomes a deciding factor in hiring and school acceptance. Is this in dispute anywhere? Because that is what they say they're doing. America First Legal, a great organization, a group backed by Stephen Miller, an advisor to former President Donald Trump, has vowed in online posts to defend merit, defeat racism, demolish DEI, which it says punishes Americans for being white, Asian, or male. And of course, having the wrong sexual preference. Now, as Trump vies for a second term in the White House, some of his allies have derided Vice President Kamala Harris as a DEI candidate, while the former president has questioned her racial identity. Because she said she was Indian, and now she's saying she's Black. So that's fine, that's for her to do, but when he was asked about it, he gave an honest answer. That's what you do. Stephen Miller's group, along with other conservative lawmakers, activists, and organizations, is using the threat of litigation and the courts, once the venue used to help secure civil rights progress, to invalidate race-conscious programs dedicated to addressing the harm caused by centuries of legalized racial injustice. Conservative lawmakers have threatened the funding of medical schools that have a DEI office or lessons on structural racism. The Medical Board of California has been sued for requiring continuing medical education courses to include implicit bias training. The suit is backed by the Pacific Legal Foundation, a Sacramento law firm that says it fights for limited government, property rights, and individual rights. The firm represents 2 California doctors and Do No Harm, a nonprofit organization whose website says it was founded to counteract divisive trends in medicine such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and gender-expansive care. Do No Harm is an organization of medical doctors, and they put themselves way out at risk. It is not a popular thing to do. It's not a safe thing to do for themselves, for their licensing, for their careers. You can Google Do No Harm as an organization, and you'll see they really do great work, and they're extremely brave people. The legal and advocacy group has suits pending in Louisiana, Montana, and Tennessee as well. And in August, Do No Harm and a Wisconsin law firm filed a complaint against the Cleveland Clinic with the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights, saying 2 efforts, the Minority Stroke Program, and Minority Men's Health Center illegally discriminate on the basis of race. In a statement, the hospital system said its mission is to care for life, research for health, and educate those we serve, regardless of race, ethnicity, and other characteristics, adding that the stroke program is open to all patients, but the Men's Health Center has not been in place for several years. Do No Harm, which was co-founded by Stanley Goldfarb, a nephrologist, that's a kidney doctor, who is the former Associate Dean of Curriculum at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, rejects the notion that systemic racism plays a role in health disparities, pointing instead to underlying medical conditions and a lack of access to prenatal care in the case of maternal health. Quote, focusing on colorblind science and research and treatment of all patients must be the priority if we want better health outcomes and a strong relationship of trust in the medical community, said Goldfarb, who serves as chairman of Do No Harm, in a statement. Joshua Thompson, senior attorney and director of equality and opportunity litigation at Pacific Legal Foundation, said in a statement that, quote, the extent, cause, measurement, and utility of racial health disparities is a highly politicized topic that should be left to politicians to debate, so long as government doesn't engage in race-based discrimination to achieve their goals. And then there are the watch lists. Turning Point USA, a conservative nonprofit, maintains a professor watch list that it says exposes scholars, quote, who discriminate against conservative students and advance leftist propaganda in the classroom. The list, which includes Williams and Hardiman, is compiled mostly from news stories, public speeches, scholarly publications, and social media, according to the watch list website. Stephen Miller's group, America First Legal, has created what it calls the Woke Wagon, a searchable database of political appointees in federal agencies. But a lot of people are under the assumption that we live in a meritocracy. But what they don't realize is how life chances are dictated by so many other factors, said Linda Sprague Martinez, a professor at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine and director of the Health Disparities Institute at UConn Health, adding that she, too, has had grant funders recently challenge her use of the word racism in her work. Quote, DEI initiatives don't even fully level the playing fields. There's no way to fully level the playing fields. It's how our parents brought us up. It's the environment we were brought up in, and some of it is luck. Some of it is nature, some of it is nurture. There is not a possibility to level playing fields. We have to do what we're passionate about and do the best we possibly can. And there's no guarantee that everyone's going to wind up in the same situation after they've tried their best. That's life. And the people that are lying and that are saying we can level the playing field, we can give everyone an equal opportunity regardless of their ability, are liars, and they're doing it just to get power. It'll never work, but it may get people to give their power away. Let's start over. Quote, DEI initiatives don't even fully level the playing fields. But if we're not paying attention to the inequities and addressing them, they're just going to persist. Why should they just persist? What if people actually accomplish things based on merit? They can change any which way they want to change. Ford said the debate about merit and inequities is ensnared in an assumption that people from historically underrepresented communities lack the expertise or credentials to hold positions in predominantly white workplaces and academic settings. Research shows Black college students are often asked if they're on a sports scholarship, and Black doctors are mistaken for food service workers or janitors. Well, if people are mistaken as one thing or another thing, that is unfortunate, and some of us are short and some of us are tall, and there's nothing we can do about physical characteristics in terms of how they're perceived in society. You can't just change society because you say you feel like it. You also can't upend everything in society. There is tremendous opportunity, and plenty of people of every skin color, every gender, every sexual preference have succeeded in the American system. The only question is if you have what it takes to succeed, no matter what your personal situation is. 6 states prohibit lessons on meritocracy's limitations, defining such critiques as divisive concepts, according to an April article in the Milbank Quarterly, a popular health and health policy journal. Social scientists, which, to be honest, I have absolutely no use for because they have no credibility, say the anti-DEI movement has co-opted and twisted the fight for justice and equal opportunity, which calls for eliminating legal and practical barriers that restrict access to resources and makes climbing the socioeconomic ladder that much harder for people historically pushed to the margins. No one is pushing anyone to any margins. You just actually have to do the work. That's it. Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra agreed. Equity remains a key driver of the Biden administration, Becerra said in an interview. Despite attacks by the anti-DEI machine, Becerra said he refuses to be intimidated by the McCarthy-type lists the anti-DEI movement has created that target not just scholars but federal workers. Quote, we've seen this before, where people get branded and listed and blackballed. In the end, it doesn't work. Becerra urged researchers and people of goodwill who find themselves in the crosshairs to not get distracted or water down their efforts. Quote, some people can try to deny history. Some people can try to rewrite history. These guys are doing both. The facts and science prevail, he said. Sure, the social science can prevail because they just make up the rules. They just redefine words like racism and come up with other terms like misinformation and disinformation that are meaningless words, only created and distributed through the mass media to interfere with people's ability to do critical thinking. Health equity researchers, there's a nonsense group, say the hostile response to DEI is happening as the field and academia develop a critical mass of scholars of color. Quote, there's always a backlash when we made progress, said Thomas Leveist, Dean of Tulane University's School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. Well, there's also a backlash when you're doing things that are not appropriate. People say, no, that's inappropriate, and no means no. That's not a backlash. That is self-defense of an excellent system. Quote, just like we had a moment during the civil rights movement that was kind of taken down when Nixon came in with his war on drugs, said Leveist, who has received hate-filled emails and phone calls because of his research into the economic implications of health disparities. If he's receiving hate emails and hate phone calls, that's terrible. No one should be sending messages like that. At the same time, a lot of those are also hoaxes. We've seen politicians get elected who've actually used hoaxes like that. There was one in Texas recently. This moment is particularly problem-filled and dangerous, said Sherman James, a professor emeritus at Duke University who has been at the vanguard of health disparities research for more than 4 decades. The social epidemiologist defies the John Henryism hypothesis, which posits that the cumulative toll of the day-in, day-out effort to be equal in an unequal society can damage the cardiovascular system, leading to early-onset hypertension, heart attacks, and strokes for African Americans. James grew up in the Jim Crow South, attending college in Alabama at the height of the civil rights movement, and remembers being spat on and hit over the head during protests. Spitting on people and hitting them over the head is always the wrong thing to do. And yet, he said, this moment of acrimony has surprising potency. Quote, it's not just a black and white kind of thing anymore, James said. It's multifaceted, multi-ethnic, multiracial. And it's not just what's happening in the United States, it's what's happening globally. And so the backlash has to have the vigor that matches the perceived threat. When James began his career in the mid-1970s, he said there were few black professors and even fewer Latinx scholars because there is no such thing as a Latinx anything. It's Latin. That's it. Especially outside of California universities. A critical mass of scholars of color didn't emerge for more than a decade. And we weren't foregrounding racism, structural racism, in our research, he said. Explicit conversations and scientific studies about how racism undermines black people's health didn't start until the mid-1990s. Just before then, Williams, now a Harvard professor, recalls routinely hearing comments like, quote, the term racism does not belong in a scientific paper, and racism is an ideological concept that can't be measured. Both of those things are true. Williams, whose research illuminates the ways race, socioeconomic status, racism, stress, behavior, and religion affect physical and mental health, says he remembers speaking on a panel in the early 1990s. Quote, I said one of the priorities of the future is to document the ways in which racism affects health. Williams, listed as one of the most cited scholars in social science research of the 21st century, said recently, quote, a gentleman raised his hand and said, what Dr. Williams is asking us to do is important, but it's impossible. We will never be able to measure racism. Williams decided to take up the challenge, saying, quote, if we measure self-esteem, why do you think we can't measure racism? He developed the Everyday Discrimination Scale, now among the most widely used tools to assess perceived discrimination in health studies. These people are so far gone and so dangerous. The wave of pushback, he said, reflects the regression from the dramatic progress that had been made, in part because of the evidence that now exists. Though Williams' work has made him a target of the right, he remains unbowed, saying, quote, "You can put me on whatever list, and I will continue to do what I'm doing. People gave their lives to open doors. I owe it to them and their sacrifice to continue." Williams and other experts said the nation has made much less progress eliminating patterns of division and disparity than most people think. Residential segregation, which affects school boundaries, longevity, green space, grocery store access, policing, taxes, air and water quality, is worse today than a generation ago, research shows. And the wealth gap remains stubbornly persistent. According to a 2023 Federal Reserve report, for every dollar of wealth a typical white household had in 2013, Black households had 9 cents and Latino households had 10 cents. By 2022, the gap had improved only marginally. Black families had 16 cents and Latino families had 22 cents for every dollar of wealth held by white families. And physicians and health equity researchers point out that the dearth of doctors of color who are more likely to be primary care providers and work in medically underserved areas hasn't changed much in more than a century. A 2021 study from UCLA found that the proportion of Black physicians increased only marginally during the past 120 years, going from 1.3% in 1900 to 5.4% in 2018. Today, the number remains largely the same, about 5%, according to the Association of American Medical Colleges. What are you supposed to do? You force people to go to medical school if they don't want to go to medical school, or if they don't have the grades or whatever the background is and the passion to go into medical school, then they can't. It has nothing to do with skin color. The share of Black male doctors, about 2.6%, has remained unchanged since 1940, according to research. The association said in an online statement, it remains committed to strengthening the diversity of the medical student body and the physician workforce as we navigate the changing legal landscape. Which is why Hardiman, not Dr. Hardiman, because she's not a doctor, founding director of the Center for Anti-Racism Research for Health Equity at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, has vowed to continue even as her work on the impact of racism on maternal health has made her a target for conservative media. This experience, she said, has forced her to grapple with the emotional mental toll of what's happening to Black scholars across the country, the impact that it's having on our well-being. One of the unrecognized aspects of the anti-DEI movement is that it stalls productivity and scientific inquiry, said Hardiman, a professor and reproductive health equity researcher. Reproductive health equity researcher? What is that, abortion? I don't know, and I'm not going to Google it. It's stupid. Quote, for the past year, my mind has been so entangled in trying to protect, trying to keep us afloat, trying to fight all those battles, said Hardiman. Named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2024. That must be some list. Quote, I haven't actually been able to draw on my own creativity, innovation, and vision to keep the work moving forward. For social epidemiologist Zinzi Bailey, there was only one option when Florida's Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, was reelected in 2022, amid vows to eliminate DEI initiatives. She left her job there. Bailey's nonsensical work focuses on the health effects of structural racism and policy solutions. Reassurance from a few colleagues was not enough of a guarantee that her work, which references critical race theory, would be protected and considered fairly in her tenure review, especially at a university in a state where the legislature and governor were hostile towards DEI. Florida enshrined its opposition in state law. Quote, health equity work is not just looking at data or analyzing it, Bailey said. It's doing community work and being able to communicate in a way that gets to the heart of the thing. That felt unattainable given the pressure to fall in line, she said, or, follow the law. So Bailey left her South Florida University and began teaching at the University of Minnesota last year. But she hasn't relocated, regularly flying back and forth. Quote, it's absolutely a hard choice, she said, adding that institutions are being held hostage, in my opinion. There is no limit to how far the people with social agendas and ideology will go. Religion is being phased out in this country, unfortunately. There's a major push on DEI. DEI, the woke agenda, it's their new religion that they're pushing, which is why for us, unless we believe in that religion, it looks completely ridiculous because it's based on things you would have to take on faith. There's no evidence for this. There's no socioeconomic epidemiologist proof that shows I'm correct. Look, I've got the data. No, it's all complete ridiculousness and nonsense, but it is what these people believe. They're willing to do just about anything to get their way. The great thing is these people are getting so much pushback, they can't move anything forward. You can hear it in their own words. They complain. They're unhappy. They're being treated unfairly. Their momentum isn't going forward. They don't get to use the word racism in their research, which means their research, while it may come out, is not going to be taken seriously. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.